All right. Good morning, everybody. This lovely month of May. Glad to have everybody here. Obviously, lovely morning. Hopefully, it's the same wherever you are. Find you well. And why don't we start with prayer, and that'll also give us as we kind of come in. So, I wanted to obviously in the month of May get us into a prayer. So, give me a second as I share my screen. I have a little Marian devotion for us to keep us connected to our mother, our spiritual mother here. So give me a second as I kind of come into that. It's not as always as easy as you say, so hold on. All right. Yes, here we go. I think this is it. All right. Hopefully you'll see our prayer here. Everybody sees that. I think that should be us. All right. I don't know why this is acting up, but give me a second while we
I'm not hearing any video. What am I doing wrong?
Yeah, no, we're not watching the video. That's the good news. But I just want to make sure we're getting for some reason the screen is showing a little odd. So can you see the Marian reflection on the screen?
I'm not hearing anything. What am I
Okay.
doing wrong?
Father Bauer, you may have can you at least hear me? Because I could hear you whisper. I can hear you talking. So I just as a added piece there. Okay, I think that gives us it. So we'll start, and if anybody has any major issues, just let us know. But let us place ourselves in God's presence as we pray this morning. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Wanted to offer a little bit of a reflection from Saint Louis de Montfort, and you know, really in his way, his insight to Mary is always something that's yeah, inspiring just to be able to rely on our mother. So I'm going to read this, but if you want to close your eyes, whatever, feel free to kind of take it in. Hail Mary, beloved daughter of the eternal Father. Hail Mary, admirable mother of the Son. Hail Mary, faithful spouse of the Holy Ghost. Hail Mary, my dear mother, my loving mistress, my powerful sovereign. Hail my joy, my glory, my heart, and my soul. Thou art all mine by mercy, and I am all thine by justice. But I am not yet sufficiently thine. I now give myself wholly to thee without keeping anything back from myself or others. Thou still seest in me anything which does not belong to thee. I beseech thee to take it, to make it thyself the absolute mistress of all that is mine. Destroy in me all that may be displeasing to God, root it up and bring it to naught. Place and cultivate in me everything that is pleasing to thee. May the light of thy faith dispel the darkness of my mind. May thy profound humility take thy place of my pride. May the sublime contemplation check the distractions of my wandering imagination. May thy continuous sight of God fill my memory with his presence. May the burning love of thy heart inflame the lukewarmness of mine. May thy virtues take the place of my sins. May thy merits be my only adornment in the sight of God and make up for all that is wanting in me. And we place ourselves under Mary's care in our own vocations and our own calls in our own way this day, and especially this month of Mary. So we say, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. All right. Looks like a few of us might be having some difficulties this morning. Good morning, guys. Thank y'all for allowing me to share that Marian reflection. Hope this finds everybody well, especially in this fun season of the cusp of summer and moving along to all of our assignments and such. As you know, we gather every other month for these all in one, and so it's glad to see so many faces I haven't seen in a little while to be able to be on here. I know Father Bauer, I see that you're still having problems. If you need any help, just kind of you could either message me or Ashton or something, see if we could kind of get you kind of clued up, or sometimes logging out and logging back in. But either way, wanted to be able to jump in and start this. And again, as all these webinars are, it's meant to be able to gather not only as a crew, but to be able to share insight. So I'd hope you'd open up and share some of your own insight and check-ins as we kind of gather in. So going back to sharing my screen and the theme of today, and then a theme of this year. So reminders of our theme of this year as we continue to grow in community. You know, I know one of the big things as we look at what it means to be in community, obviously we understand that it means that we lean on each other a little bit this time. Not only me to y'all, but also being able to kind of grow and helping y'all kind of navigate resources and anything that helps you make the best of your job. I think that's the best part of this, very much this opportunity for all of us, is that we have a pretty unique gift here with all of you on here, that we get to gather virtually. I just don't take that lightly as far as us being able to share in community our best practices, a refinement of the best things that we can do, and this time together. So thank you for being here. This community, this is what builds our little community here across, and for you as OP. So we have a couple of check-ins, but I did want to make sure that I checked back in regarding our any ideas or lessons or insights from our last annual report gathering. You know, the last one was the mission that we talked about, and being able to look at the annual report. Always, like, again, in that adult learning model, being able to go back and reflect any good learnings. Just wanted to pause, any good learnings or insight that you were able to take away from that report that you kind of saw in your time. I know some of that kind of got boiled down. If you remember at the end of that webinar, it got boiled down to like, hey, like, what statistics can I share? What pieces can I share? The impact that you could share. And as a reminder, you know, one of those things was being able to continually utilize those resources for you and your preaching. So would love to just pause and ask anybody if there was any insight or anything from the last webinar that you were able to take with you in your last month and a half since we gathered. And feel free to just unmute yourself, or if there was anything of substance or anything you want to add, don't be shy. Not everybody wants to either, but also understand that we're just warming up. If we're just warming up, we won't. But I like to claim that space, because sometimes, you know, it just comes in like content just being pushed on you, and that's not the idea here. The idea is that we really kind of are able to do that. Even if it's just a show of hands, did you find that content, at least kind of talking through the mission and the impact, was that helpful for you? Did it help kind of frame up anything from, you know, additionally trying to be able to look at the broader impact? So I'm glad it did. I saw a few nod your head and thumbs up, so that's great. Okay, well, today's topic, as you can see, is there a perfect pitch? Navigating expectations and outcomes. And you know, I always laugh of I don't know if any of y'all ever had any formal speech class, but I'll share this as a bit of a story. Um, so when the local high school that I went to here in eighth grade, our high school is kind of weird. Parochial stops at seventh grade, and then you go to high school for eighth Catholic high school. So I went to high school, and I was just nervous out of my pants. I mean, because one of the first classes you take is a speech class, and you have this like really like strong female teacher teaching a speech class, and you have to, the first thing out of the gate, I mean, you're in eighth grade, so you're scared of high school. You get there, and she basically like throws you to the wolves a little bit to get it over, to get it out of your system. And I remember being up there, with Miss Herod. You remember these teachers' names that kind of scare the heck out of you. And so which is kind of funny. Herod was like this biblical name. And I was like, look, so I get up in front of the class with Miss Herod, and she gets everybody up there, but you have to get up there, and she just kind of yelled a little bit at everybody, and she's like, you have to understand, you just have to get up there and get over your fear. There's no such thing as the perfect speech. And it really stuck with me, because it was like this idea that like there's no, in the idea of like your homily, and the idea of like this really natural kind of piece of me as even an eighth grader, understanding and releasing this expectation that I had to hit these certain things, and it was going to be just like this parting of the sky, and it was going to look down, and I was like, oh man, that was the perfect speech. And I know we have certain things and speeches that stick out in our mind, historical things, your own, people that have influenced you. But being able to kind of really pause and look at this like fun idea that like in Miss Herod's voice, is there a perfect pitch? Is there this perfect idea of like what it looks like to pitch cross Catholic as on a week to week basis? And I think we could all say with that, with the beauty of that, is that we have this idea, and we have this idea of the pieces that can kind of make up for it. But it is also good to be able to understand, in that same voice, there's no set perfect pitch, right? There's the things that can come in there, but because of the elements and the nature of what a speech or a pitch is, or a talk, it's releasing ourselves from like there's this one thing that's like, man, that was just perfect. It was there. And I think that that's helpful for us to just be able to back off and say, when you're out fundraising and you're out, sharing the word, every element, every situation is so different that you can't have one over the other. And I think that that's one of the first things that I wanted to be able to talk about. Not look, I know all y'all are seasoned homilists, y'all all seasoned people that have, guys that have gone out and done the preach. But we also have to balance this idea of this expectation. If there's not a perfect one, we know that there's certain times in us and being in touch with us when you walk away from the pulpit and you're like, man, I felt really good about that. And then the idea behind the difference between, is there a perfect pitch, and was this one of your better homilies that you've ever done? And was this one of the ones that flowed the easiest? Was this one of the ones that was kind of, and how do you break that open to be able to look at that? And that's kind of what I want to do today. We're going to talk about a few things that are going to that'll be helpful for you to frame this discussion, so that you can go back and say, when you have those moments, what can you capture from those moments when you're like, man, that went really, really well, that you could either replicate and push forward, or that you could then kind of come back and say, you know what? Oh, that was not the perfect pitch. That was not a good day. How do I improve on that? Or what was it? Kind of drilling down, what was it? And so there's a few areas inside of that I wanted to be able to talk about. And those areas are just a high level, right? We'll talk about expectations today. Um, and that's both personal and professional stuff. We'll talk about kind of the dynamics of your homily. And then we'll talk about your experience. And this is kind of going back to that feeling when you walk off the pulpit, the feeling of your experience versus the donor experience. And then we'll talk a little bit about your tool belt, and then we'll talk about what you're sealing for that perfect pitch, like how that goes back into expectations. So what I'd like to be able to do is, as we kind of jump in, I think it talks to the humanity of this, and it talks to the rawness of y'all going out week in and week out, or some of you part-time, being able to go there and have this expectation of like really being able to to check in with your expectations of like, hey, am I expected to do this every week? And if I am, how does that kind of match up with you personally kind of being able to do this? And I think the reason why I want to spend some time there is I think the rawness of your own experience and the expectation that you have inside of your preaching really helps you understand, so that your internal voice, when you're going up to preach, your internal voice, when you're going out to fundraise, when you're going out to share the word, specifically around Cross Catholic, that you have some expectation of like, okay, these are the kind of worst, the good and the bad. Now, I get this can be a little fun when you kind of share some disaster stories too, and then also when you have the perfect expectation, if you will, for when that happens and you're able to do it. So if I can, I'd like to have some of you kind of share, like, what were some times when you walked off the altar and you were like, you know what, that went really, really well. And what were those things that you could kind of pull out of there that you would say, hey, that was fantastic. And what I'd like to do is, as you share your stories kind of collectively, be able to have those kind of recorded down and saying, okay, that's what made it that experience for me. So it's going to take a little bit of sharing, but it's also going to take, I think, a great opportunity for your brother OPs to be able to hear what are the things that kind of help fulfill that experience of like walking off and saying like, man, I felt really good about that. So who would like to share? Anybody like to share about when you walked off and you're just like, man, I nailed that? This is not just bragging. I hope y'all know that I'm trying to pull these out for a reason, so that your brother OPs can identify these feelings as you go. All right, who would like to
Go ahead, Brother Chavez.
Go ahead.
This weekend, I was just amazed. I was feeling like I was watching this lady in the congregation as I was preaching, and you always know if you have your congregation by what they're doing, if you have caught them or not. And this lady caught my attention as I was preaching. She was holding on to her daughter, and sometimes I felt like she was protecting her from hearing me. That's what I thought. But I was amazed at the end of Mass, when I finished, she said, "Father, please wait for me. I have to go home for a few minutes. It'll take me about 10 minutes. Can you wait for me?" And I said, "Yes, I can." So I waited for her, and she brought back a check for $20,000. So I was just amazed that what I thought was taking place was not the reality. She told me how she had adopted her child from Africa, and that it was just the impact that the homily had on her. She said she was selling her business and wanted to do something with her money, and that was just amazing to me.
Oh, Chavez, that is, all right, you coming off the top rope here, which is the old wrestling. That is a fantastic. And look, as you know, look, that's that one. So we'll break that apart if you don't mind, because I love that. Thank you for sharing. That's so fantastic. One is obviously the affirmation by the gift, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the affirmation when you're walking off the altar, how how did you feel you preached that day? Like, if you don't mind me asking, like, so obviously it struck her heart, but how did you feel in that expectation at that time?
Well, I wasn't feeling very well. And when I had called the secretary, she didn't give me a lot of hope for the parish because she said it was very small. There wouldn't be a lot of people at mass, which there wasn't. But uh, physically, I wasn't feeling that well, but yet I knew that as I was preaching, the congregation was present, because I feel like preaching is always like a dance. You can feel that connection. Uh, at least I do anyway,
Yeah.
when it's taking place. And uh, the people that were present were elderly, but elderly sick. A lot of the people, had a hard time coming into church. So it was an elderly group, a few young people, two or three or four, something like that. And this woman was one of the younger ones that I spoke about. They gave the $20,000, but uh, I just felt tired and didn't feel like I had done my best. But at the same time, I felt connected. I don't know how to explain that,
Well,
even though I was struggling physically.
you just explained, and you kind of jumped to one of our points as we talk about later. We'll talk a little bit about later, but your experience versus the donor experience. When we talk about inside of the perfect pitch, sometimes you're going to walk off the altar and be like, ugh, or you just might even like literally, while you're physically ill, like you weren't even feeling the best. And like you're kind of preaching, but yet the donor on their side obviously was met with an open heart to your preaching. They were met with an open heart um, to your empathy for the poor. They were met with an open heart, obviously to bring it. Here's the best part, to action. She's like, don't go anywhere. I mean, obviously that's the piece. But what I appreciate is your transparency of it. Sometimes you're going to be on the altar and you'll make your pitch and you're like, man, I'm feeling a little off, but yet it speaks to somebody. Um, so that's a great experience to be able to go through that. No matter what, even when you're kind of navigating some challenges, that it could speak directly to somebody where they need to. So I'll just wrap up on my comment. And if you have any other thoughts, I'd love to be able to unpack it, but obviously the gift, that's the crazy part about wealth. We never know somebody's wealth of who we're speaking to. And I don't want to over spiritualize this, but it is kind of funny when you'll talk to a secretary and she's kind of downplaying. I know you're here to fundraise, Father, but we're just a small community. We don't really have much. Um, but the Holy Spirit was in charge there with you never know, this person could be selling a business like you came across and open the door. And obviously that's not an every weekend piece, but obviously you opened the door enough for her to imagine a $20,000 impact, right? You have to be able to open the door for her to even imagine that $20,000 could be spent to be able to help impact the poor, not just $500. You see what I'm saying? Is
Right,
like it's
right.
not just you helped her imagination kind of pass that, so then she brought that. So that's a fantastic affirmation. Any other thoughts on that, Father Chavez? Thanks for sharing.
No, well, again, the parish last year, I think, was the first time we had gone there, and there was only 900 and some dollars that was collected totally. And only 19 brochures that were collected that particular year. So I wasn't expecting much again, but
Yeah.
I was even surprised later when there was a $2,000 check given to me and another $500 check. So it changed. I was like kind of shocked because again,
Yeah.
the secretary had told me, don't expect much, Father. So it was kind of amazing.
That's a great piece for starting us off, which is in the perfect pitch. Having expectations, both personally and professionally. You're sick, you're there. That's fantastic. Anybody else want to jump in just on what I'm trying to identify and help y'all to share is just like obviously Father Chavez shared is in your time as an OP and a preacher and you're going out there, the things that when you walk off and you feel like you just knocked it out of the park, what are the things you could identify that you did well when you walked off the AMBO? Was it, as Father Chavez said something, I always call that congregation affirmation. When you're there and like people are nodding their head and kind of giving you that feel that you feel connected to it. What are things like that you would be able to pick up on or identify that may be helpful to your brother P's as you go through that? Again, this is top level. When you go through when you feel like you're kind of on top of your game, what are the things that you could kind of point to like that really make it stand out? That was a really good homily that you and pitch that you provided. Anybody want to jump in? All right, don't be scared. Come on, guys. And it doesn't have to be $20,000 checks, by the way. This is Father Chavez like dropped a big bomb on us, which is good in a good way, Father. I mean, there's no doubt. But I'm saying more kind of what I'm trying to identify is the characteristics and the feelings and the things and the markers that kind of come with those things that when you do it well, what comes up. Okay, go ahead, Father Tim. Jump in.
Yeah, I wasn't there in Ethiopia to experience this personally, but I had read in one of the articles way back when about a place called Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where we had put in a septic tank and a fence around an area and changed the history of that community because there was one broken toilet over a hole in the ground and no privacy at all, and it served 18 families. And when I had said that, I was looking at the people, and I could see by their faces they were shocked, And I told them, I said, we don't experience that kind of poverty, but these people do, and it makes us think and thank God for what we have. And again, I looked at the people's faces, and I could see that. It struck them and it touched their hearts. And it made me feel good that I had gotten a message through how much we need their support, their prayers, and donations, whatever they could do. I don't know what they gave. I don't remember that, but I just remember the impact of that story that came through one of the bulletins on Cross Catholic Outreach.
That's good, and maybe to put some more. It's really good, Father Tim. But even just in that thought, the story was like on point. Like it really felt impactful. Like when you walking off, you're like, you know what? They resonated with that story. I think that's a big piece of like being able to affirm. Like, okay, when you go back and you feel like someone is like that story flowed well. It felt like it was impactful. It felt like it was short enough. It was like compact enough to be able to make it work. So I can see where on point stories could be something that when you walk off the altar and you're making a pitch, that's like, you know what? That was one of the keys to the perfect pitch, right? These idea that my story went really well. And obviously it was impactful and something new. So it's good. I appreciate that insight. Any other things?
Hey, Corey, Charlie, Father
Absolutely,
Charlie.
Father Charlie. Go ahead. How are you?
I was just, it's a good topic. Looking at the faces when I first went as a shadow to Bernard. And at the end of Mass, there was this pile of brochures. And I said, wow, that's something. I thought they mailed them in and all that. I have never had that experience. This 10, this 5, 20, something like that. And but I understand what you're saying. You can go there and somebody eventually may give a large donation. But there's also, I think all of us, from what I understand, going to parishes, they'll mention a cross Catholic priest that had been there before, and they always seem to speak so well of them. And that's something that they left with the parish. And granted, sometimes when I get the tally of our financial coming in, you see something like $325 and you say, oh, but I'll look back. It's the same as going to a place where a dentist said that, he's on they had 8 dental clinics in one of our places, and he was going back to build another one. So there's all different things that cross my mind. It's just good to share some of them. Some of them are just too personal to get here with the whole group, but it's a lot to do with the great gratitude of the staff and the priest there at Cross Catholic.
That's fantastic, Charlie. Thank you for popping in and being able to share it, because it's good to be able to hear that. We have 2. We have Father Anthony and then Father Bauer. So Father Anthony, go ahead. You go ahead, and I see your hand up and mute. Yeah, go ahead, Father Bozeman. Good stuff. Oh, you're still muted, Father Bozeman.
Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, you good.
Well, it's funny because for me, it's always been I always want to be a high achiever, and I've always been really in awe of what the other OPs are able to do. And of course, I have never, I've heard that great things like like Father Chavez said about the 20,000. And my best friend, Father George Cantiva, talked about 15,000. I've never done that kind of thing, so I've always felt a little inadequate. But when you were telling it, I was thinking about the story of impacting, and I like to believe that I'm a fairly decent homilist and a good motivator, and I never really feel one way or the other. I think the message is always there. They'll reach somebody. And the one time I was in North Dakota, and the congregation was small, elderly, and somewhat, and they seemed like to me more poor to middle class. So I didn't have a lot of great expectations as far as raising a lot of money, but I wanted to raise awareness of really ultra conservative, ultra, kind of standoffish and all. And after the mass, people coming out, and they always are very gracious. And I haven't been to a place yet where they weren't, but this one couple came up and said, we were really moved by the stories you told, and we were going to I'm trying to save up money so my husband can go home to see his ailing mother. And I really your homily moved us, and I'm going to give a donation. I'm going to give a donation to you, and I'm hoping that God will bless us so that I can raise the money so we can send them home. And I was touched by that. I felt kind of bad. I said, well, maybe you ought to save that money. But I said, no, it's a testimony. I said to her, you can't outgive God. By your blessings, God's going to bless you also. But I was very moved that she was moved by my comments to forget about her own struggles to help those who are in need. So that made me feel good. I said, well, maybe I won't be able to raise the 15,000 like my friend Father Cantiva or whatever, but if I can do a little things that'll change, help people to see the plight of others and help them to want to give and help, that's a blessing.
It's interesting that you said this, Father Bozeman. And before we jump over to Father Bowers, I just want to drill this point home, which I think is super important for us to be able to make sure that the reason why we put in the perfect pitch about expectations is so that you didn't feel when you came in that your homily, like not everybody's going to have that 15K drop, the bomb drop, but like you, I mean, it's such a powerful story that a donor is willing to kind of open up a very personal part of their heart to be able to share with you, like, hey, I want to be able to bless them. And look, theology aside of like basically she's wanting to share her vulnerability to be able to make that gift. I think where I'm just affirming to y'all is like when you're walking off, what was it that day from that homily that you felt really kind of helped connect? What was it that you felt that day that was there? And I think for that point is you made it relatable. You made it relatable for her to be able to say, you know what, I need to go talk to him. And I think that is the power of why you stand in the back and you walk before you walk out of mass and you go stand in the back, is because you're giving people a point to reciprocate to you for the stories that you share. And so obviously when you have that kind of pitch and you're able to do that, well, obviously in the backside of it, she's like, I need to go face to face and really talk to him because he touched a nerve. And so it's good affirmation. All right, Father Bauer, go ahead, jump in.
Yes, there's no doubt these stories are so important. And one of the things I try to emphasize in my homilies is, particularly to the kids, is how blessed they are simply to be here in America. And then I give different stories to help emphasize that. And one that I find really grabs them is sharing with them the plight of Guatemala, where half of the children of that nation are severely malnourished. And then I'll turn and say, imagine this, the average 12-year-old in that country only weighs 18 pounds. And I can sometimes even hear the people groan when they hear that. They just can't fathom that. And so these stories are important to help people see that we think we have problems. I call them mere inconveniences compared to what so much of the world is facing today.
So it's one, I really appreciate you sharing that, but even on top of that, Father Bauer, I think one of the things that you just shared that I think's just affirmation of what other conversation Father Tim had mentioned is that the story, even, the idea that your story, you were able to bring this to a point that's relatable, back to Father Bozeman's piece also, is that inside of that, your pitch, you made that something where it's like it's startling enough, right? I mean, and isn't poverty startling in that way? So much so that you have to be able to kind of connect the dots in their mind of like, hey, the story shows that this is something. And it is kind of funny because we can't guilt them into giving for the rest of our lives. I mean, but we know that sometimes their own processing of that gets to that point, but helping them realize the stark differences. And I like the word you said is mere inconveniences. It is true. But sometimes it takes gratitude and stories like that to connect those dots. Good stuff. Thanks, Father Bauer.
And I would like to add this, particularly for our newer OPs. It took Joanne a while to finally convince me I needed to look at the statistics and things like that. And as I look them over, it amazes me because I essentially am doing the same basic message week in and week out. And I would tell the newer guys, don't be chagrined. You just never know who's there. And I've seen how it oscillates. It's like a roller coaster ride. Some just jump out and you go, wow, how did that happen? And other times you say, gee, I thought I did pretty good, but what happened?
Yeah,
but you
good.
Find also when you go to different places and maybe you've had 5 or 10 OPs ahead of you, but I think particularly now that we're beyond COVID, we're able to engage some people that haven't been around for a while.
Yeah.
And you just never know who you're going to touch. And I see a lot of times my task is to plant the seeds, and I don't care if Tim O'Toole waters it or whoever. We do our part, and it'll work. As I emphasize, it's all in the providence of God. I'm just an instrument, but it's going to be the Holy Spirit that's going to do the work, not me.
While I have you on there, a question came in, Father Bauer, asking about the age of how old that 18-pound Guatemalan child. You had mentioned that.
I read that in some of the CCO materials. It said the average 12-year-old in that nation weighs 18 pounds. And that really hit me. And I find it does the same thing to the people that are hearing.
Was that in your portal? Do you remember? If not, we could
It
try.
was in one of the mailings. This is some
Okay.
time back, but I
Okay.
I read a lot of different materials,
Sure,
but
no,
it
no, that's
was
all right. Yeah, that's
it
great.
was out, it's in there somewhere. I don't know
Absolutely, yeah,
where.
no, we'll dig it up. There's nothing
I could probably
nothing
go through my
scary.
files and dig it up
No,
for
no,
you for
we'll
maybe the
find it, we'll
next
share it.
meeting.
Good stuff, Father Bauer. All right, Father Dave, you wanted to jump in with a comment?
Yeah, I think Father Chavez, I think it's interesting to note that the God of surprises shows up, right? When you get the thinking that it's not going to turn out well, it hasn't turned out well in the past, and all of a sudden the God of surprises shows up and kind of throws us for a loop, and it throws Cross for a loop a little bit, and of course that loop is going to help the poor, so that's wonderful. But as I'm listening to all of you speak, I can't help but think of Avery Dulles's Models of the Church, which is a great book that pretty much we're all around the same age, and we might have read this in some of our preaching preparation and maybe other theology classes. I often find that I get comfortable and preach out of one or two of the models out of the six, and periodically I find that when I've done a better job is when I've challenged myself to maybe this week or for this next couple of weeks choose another model out of which to preach. So that might be an encouragement for us to go back to the Avery Dulles Models of the Church and to see how we can preach the poor. Can you hear, Corey? Okay, how we can preach about the poor out of those different models, which is great. And then the other thing too, I found that I find that when I respect punctuation, and I can hold the audience with a comma, and people wait, and then when that happens, they're with you. You've caught them. And I've actually had, a man come into the church at St. Ambrose in Deerfield Beach and actually scold me saying, "How dare you tell me I'm not doing enough for the poor?" And I said, "Sir, I don't know you. I wasn't preaching to you." "Oh, yes, you were. You were telling me and everybody else we weren't doing enough for the poor." And I said, "Sir, I'm sorry that you took this so personally. But maybe you took it personally because there's a reason to take it personally." So I think there's lots of different things that come into play. And I find that sometimes when people are upset with you at the door, actually, I had a lady she waited and she chased me to my car one time about my homily. And it's because their consciences are pricked. And that's not a bad place to be. But if you're father friendly and we got to make everybody happy and all those kinds of things, then we might miss those opportunities. And it's like, as people leave the church, they say, "Nice homily." You say, "What'd you like about it?" They don't know what to tell you. But if they're upset about something, not that you want them to be miserable, you don't want, there's a lot of that going on. We don't want people to be miserable. But if you kind of prick their conscience a little bit, so maybe it is saying that, a 12-year-old is 18 pounds. If they prick their conscience, it's not a gimmick, it's truth telling. And it might have them say, "You know what? I could do a little bit more, or I can write, I don't know what to do with this money, but I can write that $20,000 check or that $5,000 check or whatever." Trust punctuation, trust your preparation. Ask yourself, am I always preaching out of the same modality with the model of Avery Dulles? Maybe this week I'm going to change it up, So there's lots of things that come into play. And sometimes the best homilies might be the ones that you think are the poorest ones. Maybe if the delivery didn't come or whatever as you thought, but maybe somebody else really caught it.
And that's what I like about that. So thanks, Father Dave, for that insight. And what I like about it, and going back to Father Chavez's point, is I love being able to drill down to your interior voice and to the exterior action, right? So there's this idea that like you're getting up there, you're preaching, you're like, "Man, I'm not feeling good. I don't feel the crowd." It's, that there's sometimes even the Holy Spirit working. It's like, "Look, I'm going to write all that off and like, we're going to have this." And like, So even as we dive into like Father David's point, which is, the critics in the back, all these things kind of could influence this idea of like, man, what is it that I'm going to really be able to help kind of refine and make this the best that I can, knowing that there's so many elements to it. It's a good segue into one of the next points I wanted to make, which was, and I'm going to share my screen here, it's just some questions for you to kind of be able to navigate, which is this idea of, again, just going back to be able to show you, so under that expectations piece, right? The personal and professional, and just being able to ask yourself, like, what, are you your toughest critic? And the idea there is, where professional growth comes, where individual growth comes, it's not just being able to read self-help books and all that stuff, but really is being able to say and what to be in touch with. And this is either through journaling or just the power of these groups, especially if you're extrovert or introvert, you need to hear this, is to be able to identify markers that help you to say, you know what, that went really well, and this was the reason why it went well. And knowing that your toughest critic, almost in the way that you prick the conscience of a person, maybe the Holy Spirit's using an agitator to come challenge you on something that you preached about that either affirms you or course corrects you. I do love that question. Like, what do you like about the homily? It kind of calls them out and be like, were you listening, or are you just kind of being like, nice to me? And it is that balance of somebody that, obviously our role is not an agitator, but we obviously don't want to soothe the bandages of the poor with just niceness. I mean, this is the true gift of, I think, where we're called to inside of this is being able to find and be in touch with your own voice of like, hey, how am I best challenged? And what is that inside of those expectations that really kind of keep you on top of your game, so that when you do have those times when things go well, that you're able to kind of identify, journal them, record them, share them. But then that pushes us to a different way, which is saying, okay, what do you expect out of yourself? Like, what is that? Are you expecting, because the malaise of it, if you just expect that, like, sometimes I'm going to feel, or is that pushing yourself or not? Or just saying, you know what is your internal voice to you say, you know what, my pitch just now, like I'm talking about not specifically the homily side, but on the cross Catholic pitch, right? Do you come out of that and say, you know what, I nailed that story. I did a great job of kind of cycling through the giving options, and I put them right to where they need to be. I dropped another additional story, and I felt that my exit and my last kind of point was emotional, stirring, and I'm out. Those are the things that I'm just trying to help you think through of like when you're up there and when you're coming down and when you're in between masses, that you're able to kind of say, you know what, I felt like I really did a good job on that ask. And that critic, again, you're going to get emails from Joanne, you're going to hear talks from me, but going back and forth with yourself and being that critic, the best way that you're challenged, find that best way and lean into it, whatever it is, because I think that that's going to just pay dividends for you, not only for your tenacity of the time, but also for you to be able to say, you know what, I have a really good little model here to keep me balanced and to keep me in check to do my best. Father Bauer, jump in.
Yes, a thought that hits me, and because I think sometimes we can feel a little overwhelmed in terms of, how much can I get into the homily, because we want to keep it balanced and not too wide. But what I've developed over time, and I learned this through my sales background years ago, you want to try and have repetition, but not always saying the same words. But I try to plant some seeds and foster a little bit at the beginning of Mass, at the intro where I introduce myself, and I'll kind of start and elaborate a little bit about, we Cross Catholic provides food, shelter, and hope to the poorest of the poor around the world. I said, keep in mind, poorest of the poor does not exist in the United States. and I explain how that is. And then certainly the homily, but one that I've found really gets people's attention, and if you haven't used it, look at V3, the Eucharistic prayer. I think it resonates really well with what we're all about and why we're there. And it's just another way of planting some additional seeds, emphasizing the same message, but in a little different way. And then I always do a little brief communion meditation, utilizing some of the words of Mother Teresa. But I think those things can be helpful, where you can keep your homily nice and pithy, and yet you can punctuate the Mass with different little feeders to just keep sending that same message, basically.
That's good. You know, it is an interesting piece when you get into each of the elements of your homily, and I'll use that as kind of our segue into this next piece, which is, you know, I wanted to be able to address the dynamics of your homily and the pitch, and the reason why I wanted to address that is just kind of going back to like this idea of the perfect pitch. What are the things that you could claim, and what is your process out of the dynamics in your homily and your pitch that you're going back to either refine or to really to say, you know what, I can't do that again. That didn't work out. And I think, Father Bauer, to your point of like, you're saying like, okay, when I prayed Eucharistic prayer number 3, it really helped for me.
Okay, it's not Eucharistic prayer 3. It's V3.
Oh,
It's one of the
okay.
optional ones. In fact, a lot of people don't even know they exist. I've had them come up
I know
and say,
I know
where did you come up with that Eucharistic prayer? I've never heard that.
And to that point, you know, for what you found was a sweet spot for you to match things that happen within inside the context of the Mass to your preaching. And so for each one of you, obviously that's a good suggestion for you, and that worked for you. But what I love about that is that you went back and found in this very deliberate way the dynamic between something that happened inside the context of the Mass that helped you drive your point home. So what am I saying for this? Do you have, you know, what is this idea that, you know, some people will consider it like, well, this is a little bit too formal, but is it a checklist that you finish your Mass? Like, so for example, you know, when you go to preach in a homily, especially if you're unpacking the gospel or one of the readings, if you just mail it in, and hear me out, I'm not complaining about, but you've all been in Mass when you've seen it, and it just feels like it's just kind of like, it's just been put out there, that it didn't have the substance of the Mass, that and of the gospel, the insight that you wanted it. So how does that feel in the same way if you just mail it in and just in a rote style repeat it? So repeat your pitch, you know, the cross Catholic pitch. I think in some ways it could kind of have the same revelation or same exposure of if you just mail it in on the homily side, right? On the unpacking of the gospel. And so what do I mean by this? I really want you to be able to help think through the dynamic inside of the same preparation that you would need to make the gospel impactful for them personally would be the same kind of rethought of what do you do as your prep for the pitch? Are you thinking like, you know what, I need to change up the story, or you know what, I need to make sure, like, what is the mental checklist that you run through that really helps you to say, okay, I need about 2 minutes here, I need about 2 minutes here, I need about 3 minutes here. Like, what are the things that could help you in the same way that you prepare for the unpacking of the gospel, that you'd run through that list in your head? Why we don't just give you a checklist, or why it's not just a checklist, because the perfect pitch doesn't exist in one box. It happens in your own experience of like, okay, I need to be able to make sure, I need to go beef up my stories. If y'all remember from that, the webinar we did a while back, the story, the idea of the story, right? Compared to Lectio Divina. Remember we talked about, you know, what if you said the same story, but from a different perspective? You know, the idea, I'll just take Father Bauer's idea of the 18-pound Guatemalan, you know, children. Well, what if you took that from the perspective of the mom, the next story, and say, What do you do when you walk in and you wake up your son to get him ready for the day, and you pull back the sheets and you see the bones of his ribs? How difficult is that? You're bringing them into the pain of the story, but at the same time, you're telling the same story and keeping it fresh for you so that it's just in your imagination, that idea, it's taking truth, but giving it perspective and bringing it to life. And I think that those are the kind of things that could really help kind of take the dynamics of your homily, obviously, and then take the dynamics of your pitch and kind of bring them together so that it's keeping it alive and keeping it fresh for you. Okay. Any thoughts about that? Any kind of piece? I did want to make sure we talked about the dynamics of it. One of the things that kind of comes up with that is this idea that you know, when we go back and forth about your experience. Oh, Father Ball, you unmuted. Did you want something? You want to say something?
Yeah, Corey, I like what you emphasize there, because one of the things I've found helpful is I always like to do some research, not only studying the uh, website of the parish, but also I find Wikipedia is a very helpful tool to learn about the area and the community. And you know, sometimes I'll find like I had one parish I remember in Maryland some time ago, and they had a very heavy concentration. In fact, it was the heaviest in the country of Guatemalans, and so that was more of an emphasis in the homily to appeal to them and how they can help their own countrymen, etc. But I find, you know, you'll find different communities around the country, and Wikipedia will help identify some of the
That's good.
nuances of
Yeah.
that community, and you can tailor your pitch
Yeah,
a
you
little
pitch
bit
that.
to
Sure,
maybe
sure.
focus some things, particularly if we're active in a country where there's a large concentration
Yeah,
of
sure.
those
That right.
people.
Yeah, that's good. Good insight. Father Dave, you had something else before we jump to this? Your experience, donor experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how easy this is to do, and it needs to be done very gently, but I also think music has a way of weaving the same theme throughout the liturgy if possible. So, you know, when I've had the chance to preach in places, what I try to do, if it works, and it doesn't always work, is to see if I can contact the music minister to say, what's the choir singing, or what's the cantor singing, so that way the theme might be repeated without extra preaching later on in the liturgy, you know. So obviously, you know, if the psalm is "the Lord hears the cry of the poor," that's a no-brainer, right? But
Right.
maybe there is a song that can be sung, or is already being practiced and prepared for, that could drive your point home. And I think that's part of pitch, and that's part of reinforcement.
No, it's good. And those times that those have lined up, I'm sure for you, Father Dave, or all of you, is that when those things line up and you kind of it's a marker. You feel like, man, that went really well. Like I preached well, the music was lined up. Those are the things that you kind of put together. Let's go back to lean into this real quick. This experience, your experience versus the donor experience. The reason why I wanted to be able to share this thought and this idea is because I think it's super helpful, going back to Father Chavez's point about when we talked about expectations and this idea of like a perfect pitch. But I'm going back to this idea from you know, what does it mean when it's but you know, when you tell these stories and you give in your pitch, this idea that like, how are you allowing the donor to enter into that pain? So this is funny enough, it was prefaced a little bit about this prick, right? This idea that we're not all roses. We can be Mr. Nice Guy, and we need to be, by the way. I don't want any grouchy priest. But in a loving way, guys. But I would say, you know, this idea that you're challenging them in a way, and that idea is the donor experience versus your experience. So think about all that you're packing in with your own experience kind of coming into this, and then the donor experience. We sometimes do put too much weight for the info sheet. So right, the info sheet comes to us, we read it. Father Chavez, I love the fact that you said this, the lady, the secretary on the phone was like, look, all bets off. You're not going to get anything from here, and you just kind of, I mean, it was like a microphone drop. And so inside of that, we have this idea that we really need to go back to, like, our experience is going to be so much different than the donor experience, but we need to think in these terms so that when we're going up to the altar, when we're entering into a parish, that you always keep in mind this freshness of, hey, the donor on this side this could be a real Holy Spirit moment. You could really be able to have this, like, I don't want to judge or come up with something that's going to give them, kind of write them off immediately. So, like, you might look at it one way that happens is we oftentimes look at a parish and say, well, they're poor. And so I'm not going to bring up this idea of a stretch goal, right? Somebody saying, I'm going to invite them to a larger gift. That would be insulting. Well, why don't you do that? Because of times like this. But at the same time, you don't want to be insulting by asking only for big stuff. You want to be able to have this experience to know the difference between those two. And when you're able to enter the donor experience into this pain, it changes and touches their heart in their own way. And I always say, like, part of that too is being able to say, if you walk off the altar, I'm just keeping the same idea. If you walk off the altar, walk off out of the ambo, and you say, man, that felt really good. I had a really good pitch, and I felt like my homily was on point, the music's on point. Have you ever paused to be able to say, what do you think the donor remembers from my pitch? What does the donor really remember? And the reason why I ask that, and why I think it's important for us to reflect on, is they can't remember everything, nor are they supposed to. But what is it inside of your talk? What is it inside your pitch that's going to be really resonate with them? Well, Father Bauer mentioned one of them, and that's repetitive. Like, you need to really kind of drive a point home. Like, you have to say, when you say it once, you say it 3 times, you say it 7 times. How do you repeat something in a healthy way to bring emphasis, right? Your inflection, the way you bring your voice to it, those things are obviously important. What's another way that you could do it that really helps the donor remember what it is from this pitch? And this is going back to, like, your experience versus the donor experience. So the times that donors have come up to you and have shared, and this is the point of this exercise, when the donors have come up to you after you're preaching and they've shared something with you about the pitch that was kind of like excellent, what were those things so that you could remember from the donor experience how to either replicate that or kind of keep that in mind as you move forward? Thoughts or ideas around that? What are those things that really the donors kind of come up to you and shared that you felt like, man, you know what? That's good to be able to hear, because those are the things that help kind of, again, the first part was your experience. This part now is about the donor experience. What are things that the donors have shared that kind of come up to you, that have come up to you and said, hey, man, this is the right idea? Father Phelps, go ahead. You're muted though.
Yeah, I want to give credit to a fellow OP when I heard him use statistics. And the one that struck the person, I remember when she came up and told me about it, was that when I woke up this morning, I shaved and I put water on my face. Yeah, but 1 out of 5 people don't have a faucet because they have no running water. So they remembered they have no faucet, they have no running water. My gosh, yes, you don't need one. And that kind of like it became something we have what they don't have, and we can make a difference. So that was one thing that struck me.
Well, I like that. And it's interesting, just to affirm you, Father Phelps, which is, I think part of that thing's like, what does the donor remember? When we're able to do that, it's when it really hits home. And sometimes you would have to draw that point to something that's going to be relatable to everybody, right? I mean, so you'd be like, what they don't have when they get in my Porsche and my air condition isn't that cold? Well, obviously that's not relatable. at least I don't know what that feels like. But what I would say to that, and I think that that's neat, is when you draw the connection back to some very basics that are going to stick into their mind. And funny enough, it's one of the pieces in this talk is it really is a donor experience that you've broadened their mind to that is often taken for granted. It obviously comes in gratitude of like, have I really truly said a prayer of gratitude when I'm brushing my teeth in the morning? You know, and this idea that like I have running water, I just turn it on and off. And that faucet is a repeatable action that almost everybody wakes up in the modern world and does, is we turn on our faucet. So it's relatable. So thanks for sharing that story, because I think that that is definitely from the donor experience, something that I've seen really hit home is when it's something that is can be rote or just kind of predicted, that they often take for granted. And so you're bringing them in through that as an act of gratitude.
One other thing, can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely, Father Chavez. Go ahead.
One of the things that I often find amazing is because I have to speak to two different groups of people on any given weekend in two different languages, and the way I communicate, and I find myself shifting because of trying to address these people and all the various groups that are present. But one of the things that I find is people telling me about the fact that I really believe this, you know, and they're always make a comment about that. I'm not just talking, I'm not just trying to push something on them, but in the sense of the idea of, do I believe this really? I have to ask myself constantly that question, and does that come across? And it does come across to many people because many people comment about that constantly, weekend after weekend. The other thing is in the thinking about what does God think about this? Because I'm amazed at how much God speaks about the poor in Scripture, and it's a fact that sometimes we don't even think about. Over 3,000 passages that speak about the poor in the sacred Scriptures, an issue that He speaks more about than anything else in the Scriptures. So, bringing that fact across and helps people to process this, I think, in terms of my experience.
And that's solid for us to just be able to hear. So thanks for sharing that, because really at the end of the day, you get me, you get and whatever, any fancy person to gather you, but really at the end of the day, it's be reminded that this is for the poor and that it's a gospel call, not
Right.
His call, not Cross Catholic's call. I mean, it's a gospel call that Cross Catholic is honored to be able to be the conduit for God's mercy and love to these people. And what a fantastic gift to be reminded of that. So thank you for that, Father Chavez, because that's at the heart of all this is our gospel call to serve the poor. Father Bozeman, go ahead, jump in.
I'm sorry, my phone is working slowly.
Yeah, don't apologize. I'm glad to have you. Come on, what you got?
Just really quickly, one of the things that you talk about the impact on the on the donor. I was thinking about when I shadowed Father Bernard, how when he said something that resonated to me, and so I knew it would resonate to others.
I
When he
love
said
that.
that 96% of 94% of what we collect goes right to the poor. And so many people have come to me after that and said to me, you know, in a time where they really want to see bang for their buck, they're really happy to give to Cross Catholic because they see, because you tell the other stories, you know, other things, the building of the wells in Guatemala and all over and all those other things, but that they know that their money is not going just in administrative costs, but really going to help those who are in need. And it was what resonated to me. I knew I didn't know it had such a resonation to others.
Yeah, and as we've seen and opened up, Father Bernard does that so well. It's smooth. It's a smooth piece of what would be I call in his, especially his pitch, but also just in general of sealing the deal, right? I mean, you have to remove the doubt that you're going to take this and spend this money right where it is for the poor. So write the gospel message and you bring that. And how do you do it? Well, you know what? There's no organization that's going to do it as well as us that's faithful to the teachings of the church. And that's a beautiful thing. So no, thanks for that reminder, because that's a huge piece. You were with a good one going on your shadow, and that's great.
I bow to him. He's awesome.
Get out of here. Come on, you're supposed to smile bigger than ever. He's coming up a smile. That's great. All right. No, that's fantastic. And look, I'll go back and even say, I think one of the things that's neat about this conversation is that when you hear it amongst yourselves, like this idea, like, look, we reminded obviously for it's the poor. And it's a good segue into the piece, because I know we're getting close in time, but I want you to know that, like, again, from that speech teacher, there's not that perfect pitch, but there is just an abundance and an overabundance almost of just tools at your disposal. So what is in your tool belt that you use constantly? And I ask you this so that you can then be truly refined back to yourself. How often do you go into the portal to be able to go check your, the new stats? What are the stories? Are you constantly refining and being able to challenge yourself in some of the weekend that's coming up, the pitch that you're about to do? Do these stats roll off your tongue? Do they are the stories kind of coming to you naturally? Have you reimagined your story? Have you tightened up your story? Funny enough, one of those things is like, I have a great story, but geez, you're going to make me sit through 15 minutes of it, or it could be something as funny as like, look, your story needs a little bit more of a personal impact. What are those things inside your story that are going to be, or inside the tool belt, that are going to make you a better preacher and a homilist? And so I just encourage you to be able to use those things, but not only just use them, but to be able to really put the same time in weekly on the homily, on the pitch, than it is the homily. Because it's not that there's so much a perfect pitch as much as it is the perfect way to be able to prepare for that. And it's being able to kind of go and use the resources truly that's at your disposal that sometimes you just forget about, but it's these calls that kind of help remind you. I do want to remind you that inside of your tool belt, and it's the things that we had is from one of the past webinars, it kind of came up in one of the individual coaching sessions we had, was this idea of being able to understand the words that work. Your words, and just affirming you inside of this process, are really, go back and really help refine the work and the tools that you're doing. Like, so go back and look at that in a way that doesn't force anything. It's not, you don't want to be unnatural about it, but really that help you to kind of expand that idea that you're going back and saying, hey, you know what? My tool belt is full of stories. It's full of the arsenal of the words that I want to be able to kind of drill and bring home. And it's full of specifically the gospel, the message, the joy that I want to exude. And those are the things that you could then walk off the ambo and say, you know what? I really felt that was driven home and made a big difference. I'll ask you I'm going to end on this, and then we'll kind of open up for some conversations, but I wanted to bring this point home. So this is me remodeling my house. It's not real, but it may look similar, I should say. The question is what's your ceiling? And I go back to be able to say, we all have our comfortable ceilings where we are. Funny enough, one of mine, although during COVID, you should see my sheetrock patch job, or not patch job, but my brother and I sheetrocked in our patio. And it's like the only part of the house that's really curvy. And as I tell my wife, we have character in that part of the home. But I say that because my ceiling there was like, it was like, okay, I'm just not the best there. But it was kind of being able to, I wanted to use this picture just to be able to help you think through of like, what is your ceiling? How do you push through this idea of like, my expectations are going to be high for myself. I am not looking necessarily as if there's some perfect pitch, but really, what are the things am I putting in the work to make the refinement and the stories well and the data well for it to flow well, that I'm kind of fine tuning myself professionally to be able to get to my ceiling. And is my ceiling higher than I even imagined? Does God's idea of your ceiling even higher? As God is surprises was the word we used earlier. Is your ceiling even higher than what you would imagine? I think part of that comes from preparation and from these conversations. Like, I know you could be like, Corey's just talking here and we just have it. But really, I think that these intentional carve outs of an hour and a half allow you to be able to pause and say, hey, I'm really working on this. I'm gonna kind of push out through my ceiling and see what I could do. And so I'll end now. I'll end the, if you will, the push there. But I did want to be able to help you think through all of these things in the perfect pitch is about your expectation and the ceiling that you can reach. And I would hope that y'all kind of see that as a personal cheerleader of somebody behind you saying, hey, how do you get there, and how together can we get there, so that you feel supported and you feel that it's all there. Closing comments, thoughts, ideas, gems that you want to share with everybody. Put it out there. What do y'all have? I was trying a new trick. If I turn off my video, would y'all talk? I don't, I was like, okay, well,
Well, the one thing I want to say, if I could, is that being a part-time OP, I really appreciate the veterans. And I really want to affirm, Tony, what you said, and Bernie, the ideas you give me, I appreciate those. So I just want to affirm that, so, but that's important for someone like me to stay fresh by hearing others. So I just want to thank you for that.
And for folks, I'm just going to affirm, just you taking the chance to share that word is important to hear, really, for all of us to just be able to. So thanks for recognizing them and for your humility and honor to say that about them and for them. Father Bernie?
Yeah, Corey, great webinar as always. Thank you. You had asked, sometimes how do you know that you had hit it, the right tone, the right. And I think that twice this happened to me that in telling the stories, and it was said already. Maybe Carlos, you had mentioned Carlos, you mentioned it. That people know that you believe what you're saying, that it's real for you. It's not just words. And I had the experience twice of people from one from Togo and one from Central America come up to me at the end of Mass and say, you told my story. That was me when I was 5 years old. And the knowledge that I am telling truth, it's just really, affirming. So I thought I'd share that.
That's stirring. That's moving. It really is. And I think all of you who go out week in, week out really know that, like, you can't do this work truly and authentically without believing it in the deepest part of your heart. It's the reason why prayer, your commitment personally to prayer, keeps you rooted in the truth. It keeps you rooted in the gospel, in your concern and in dire, right? Your dire desire, your inner heart desire to be able to be a witness for the poor. And those things, all this flows from there. And again, on this, the professional side, all those things, like you said, words can kind of go away, but if you believe it and it's in your heart, it's inspiring. It gets you going, and that inspiration then allows you to tweak and reform, and kind of drill down on the best practices and the way that you do it, and understanding expectations and people's points. But all this truly goes back to that. So thanks for that insight, Father. I mean, it's motivational. Any other thoughts as we kind of close up, as we go our way?
One of the challenges I
Oh, go
always
ahead,
like
Father
to,
Chavez.
one of the challenges I always leave with people is, do we simply believe in God or do we believe God? Which is something distinct and different. We can believe in God intellectually, but if we believe God, we will act on what we believe. And I always kind of try to bring that in as a challenge to people, because if we believe God, then we will do something about the poor. It's not something that we can just hear and let go by. It's something that we have to act on. So that kind of challenge I always leave with people, in the sense of, do we simply believe in God or do we believe God? Because the demons believe in God, but they don't necessarily believe God.
Yeah, it's good. Good motivation. Well, thank you all for doing that. Listen, in gratitude, obviously, for all the way that you preach, that you serve, you go out as modern day missionaries. It's always an honor for me to be in this seat, to be able to help the conversation. I love the community that it builds. I hope you know that you remain in my prayers, and for your voice for Cross Catholic and the poor. God bless all y'all steps, your travels. And until next time, we'll talk soon, guys.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.